What advantages do you have as an Indian company?
Can you speak up?
If you have mic also.
What advantages do you have as an Indian company in India in this space?
So we understand the market much more deeper. India is a very different opportunity. See, Uber's ambition is that people like you guys should sell off your car. In India, nobody even owns cars. 70% or close to that Americans own cars. 5% Indians own cars, and our road roads are always through that. So just from that point of view, the problem we are solving is very different. And hence the solution that we'll build from a first principles approach will be very different. And that's where we started off 4 years ago. And we've built a very different business model. We've built a very different customer acquisition model. And all in all, we've built a very different business from Uber. And that's led to our Ola, and now Ola plus Taxi for sure owning a large part of the market. And that's what keeps the team energized, because we are not just copying an American model. We are building and solving for a local solution, local problem.
Rishi, you're from an American company. Now, you're exactly on the other side of that. How do you navigate a country which is pretty complicated, many languages, different cultural norms? How does a company like Twitter become successful in India?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and very energizing to see the turnout. I think for Twitter in India, the theme is quite similar to what you were saying, Bhavesh, which is I think if there's any market in the world where Twitter has been highly aggressive and intentional about offering a uniquely Indian experience, or uniquely local market experience, it is India. On the one hand, you need to deliver a product experience across platforms that is performant. Right, India, you have network conditions in India where 3G really feels like 2.5G. You have all kinds of Android devices in the market. You have many users. While there are these narratives of 600 million mobile phone users and smartphone sales skyrocketing, most smartphones are still not data active, and so you have users who exist across platforms. And so in India, we've spent a lot of time driving up the performance of the Twitter application in India. We have delivered really interesting experiences on what we call Twitter Missed Call and Twitter SMS. We just bought a company in Bangalore, actually, which was, I think, a big moment for the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India. We bought a company called ZipDial, which basically enables us to connect Twitter accounts to phone numbers. So imagine in India dialing a Twitter account. You can do it now. You can call the Prime Minister's account. It hangs up immediately, and you start receiving his tweets as SMSs in real time. So on the one hand, we've delivered a product experience that works across platforms, because if you're interested in winning in India on mobile, you have to be across platform. You can't build for iOS, you can't build for Android. The second thing we've done is deliver a highly content-forward experience. India is a country with a rich and celebrated media heritage. Indians love media, love information, love content. And at Twitter, we can't let our content, we think we have the best content in the world, we can't let it hide behind some convoluted process to get to it, right? So we've brought content to the front. So when you're going to twitter.com, when you're dialing for a Twitter account, we bring the best of Twitter to you, even if you don't have an account. And so with the Cricket World Cup happening now, with IPL coming, with the elections last year, a lot of our work was on bringing the best mobile content in India to the front. If you're a DTH user in India, you could actually use a remote control. Airtel DTH, the equivalent of Tata Sky in India, can press the green button on your remote control. There's remote controls in India. Press the green button, you saw tweets on the television screen, and you could tweet with your television remote control. So those are just some examples, but at a top level, delivering an experience that works across platforms and bringing value proposition to the front, because Indians want to feel it, want to be touched by value proposition, and don't want it to be a few steps away. So it's been enormously successful, and similar theme from what Bhavesh was saying.
You mentioned infrastructure, and no tech company can survive. I mean, Uber can launch easily in the US because everybody's got a broadband connection, everybody's on the internet. India's not the same thing. This new government is very tech-focused, very business-focused, and is promising to connect the country. I mean, how optimistic are you, Sandeep, that this can happen in a relatively short space, the kind of time that it needs to happen in?
I think some of that is already happening. What Rishi was describing,
this experience of connectivity of 2.5 is, but the good thing is there is 2.5. And that is reflected in usage because people don't have other choices. So today, e-commerce, right? People are transacting from tier 2, tier 3 towns or rural environments because they don't have the product in the market. So even if they have the 2.5G, they will do whatever it takes for them to transact, right? So the question now is, what Twitter has done or what Bhavish has done is they've said, okay, I'm going to work with this infrastructure constraint. And I'm going to try and provide the best user experience I can within that constraint. And if you are an entrepreneur, you're thinking that way, I think you'll be very successful. So it's instead of saying, complaining and saying, oh, we can't build a business because the infrastructure isn't there, the way to think about it is, this is a unique opportunity. And that's what, when we look at from an investor perspective, that's what we look at, right? And say, is the entrepreneur thinking about this? Somebody mentioned yesterday in a coffee session we had, that these are just things that are transported from the US, business models that are transported from the US to India. That is totally wrong, right? Sitting here in Boston, you feel that way. You talk to Bhavish, you heard Rishi say, even Twitter, I'm sure when he's building a product, when he's thinking about it, it has to be done locally. When Google built Google Maps in India, they actually built MapMaker, right? There wasn't the whole application, the way Google does maps today, the whole idea came from the fact they had to solve the problem in India. There was no way they were going to go and map India the same way they mapped the US. So they did a crowdsourcing platform, and they built that product, which is now the basic product across all of the world. So I think that there are opportunities in India that will get created because of the way India is, and not, it's not in spite of, it's sort of despite of the business that they're creating.
So really, when will we see a big global Indian tech company, an Apple or a Samsung from India?
I think this is so I can speak from my business perspective. We've seen a huge inflection point over the past 1 year specifically, or 2 years more broadly. It's driven by two factors: mobile penetration and increased data use on the mobile. And the ecosystem is evolving very, very fast. Bangalore is it feels like Silicon Valley to me. I've been to Silicon Valley a few times. Bangalore is just so full of excitement, so much more entrepreneurs coming into the ecosystem. And that, I think, is a leading indicator towards shaping up of a global internet company out of India. You saw this in China also, right?
Well, we were saying just when the session started that you're able to attract some pretty top talent now. I mean, with the salaries in Bangalore that we were talking about earlier on. I mean, tells you crazy money.
Sure, the salaries I pay my engineers and the ecosystem pays in India to engineers is dollar equivalent to what Silicon Valley engineers get. And the cost of living in India is not that high. Net the employee is better off working out of Bangalore. And this is not just engineers though, by the way, now. Because there's talent normally grows more organically, business opportunity is more inorganic right now. There's significant more money companies are willing to pay to get top talent. And we're seeing that in the number of people who are coming back from the Bay Area to Bangalore.
Are you getting sort of non-Indians coming to India in increasing numbers, do you think, because of the money, the opportunity, and everything else that's available?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the fact that Twitter historically has had a rather centralized view with respect to product and engineering, we've kept it close, we've kept it in San Francisco. The idea that our now biggest product and engineering center is going to be in Bangalore is not inevitable, and I think is a reflection of our confidence. The company that we bought, called ZipDial, was founded by an American, a young woman from California, grew up in the Central Valley, went to Stanford, just moved to India, knew nothing about the country, and lived there for 7 years. We all know her quite well. And the reason I'm optimistic is it's not just that you have engineering talent, but you have product and engineering talent that can think in an interdisciplinary fashion about consumer problems. That's what we're noticing more and more. The company we bought wasn't some back-end solution. It was a company that knew how to delight consumers through partnerships, of course, with businesses. And to Sandeep's point, one of the things you can expect in India is at least we say at Twitter, is not just what can Twitter do for India, but what can Twitter in India do for other markets. A lot of what we're investing in will have implications for our strategy in markets like Indonesia, markets like Brazil, markets like the Philippines, where you again have young populations experiencing mobile data for the first time as we speak, and look forward to the contributions of Bangalore the rest of the region.
No, I think you gave a couple of specific examples, and Apple, for example, was one that you used. So you look at what's happened in China. So China saw initially people, coming into China, building businesses because of the language. People, there were individual companies created for China. That ecosystem, as it got built and it created a critical mass, allowed brands, new technologies all to emerge. So Xiaomi, for example, is a classic example of somebody who thought of a different business model. It's a phone at the end of the day, but it's a unique business model that will only work in China because most of the commercial is the sales are happening online. People are spending so much time buying things online, and you can think about starting a sales channel which is only online and build a large company around that. And they took that model and said, okay, if I just do that, how much can I save in my retail channel, my branding costs and everything else, and just build a completely different business. Now, they've taken that and they brought it to India. So Xiaomi in India uses the same model of functioning, and they create the same, sort of story there. So it's a question, again, I go back to this point that they looked at what worked in China. This is what the Shishir said, right? They said, I can actually do a pure online play in China and build a company that can compete with Apple. And they're now taking that and saying, which other markets are now trending towards online as a primary driver for retail, and I can, implement the same model in those markets.
Just one kind of related to that question I would have is that I wrestle with. We work with a lot of entrepreneurs in India that are doing things on top of Twitter, and the thing I always notice is revenue pressure. Right? They're all struggling with revenue pressure, which gets in the way, perhaps, of a laser focus on consumer and audience. And so I don't know from Bhavesh and Sandeep's point, if you have a point of view on that, because when I think of can the next Twitter come from India, the thing I always wrestle with is that our number one objective in India is not revenue, is getting every Indian using Twitter because revenue flows from that. We have the luxury to be able to talk about that because of capital markets in the United States. Any perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. I think that has evolved a lot. Over my 4 years, I've seen that evolve a lot. And now we're in a position where we can say no to profits. Our business model says that revenues accrue from day one, but profits are not central. In the internet business, it's all about growth. And the good thing is, the pressure comes from the investors. Right? And the good thing is, most investors understand that now. I mean, all investors understand that now. It's a land grab for consumer mindshare. You should go for that first, and profits will follow. I think that's evolved very, very fast. Sandeep, what's your?
Yeah, I think that's the big change is what Bhavesh described. Bhavesh, when he came to us 4 years ago and presented a minimum guarantee model, which was, I'm going to go and get these taxi cab drivers and I'll pay them to come on my platform. And I don't know how you recall, I said, yeah, but that's great, but equally you have to go and advertise and get Ola stickers on all the cabs, because ultimately the consumer has to be aware of who these supply is, right? If it's just a supply that you're paying, they'll take your money happily, but eventually you have to get consumers to use it. So the big change, as you said, is really people are now, investors are comfortable paying for that initial minimum guarantee. I remember, will this guy ever be able to turn this into a business? That was going in the back of our head. That has become a lot easier, and that's partly because consumers are buying, on mobile apps. Consumers are buying on the internet. There's a fundamental shift that reflects much more of what you see in the US, what you've seen in China. India's, Indian people keep saying India is 7 years behind, 10 years behind. I actually think it's probably 3 years behind at most, because the consumer is learning so fast on how to use these services, how to maximize things. Today I had to go from here back to the hotel yesterday, and I said, can I get a taxi, or where's the taxi stand? And one of the students said, oh, just Uber, right? And I'm still not thinking that way, but if you go to Bangalore today, and many people, come and sort of present to us, and afterwards they, do you need a car, or do you have, just call Ola cabs and you go, right? So it's become part of their day-to-day life, and that's what I think is changing, that will drive India to move much faster. So I don't know if Sajid didn't said this, right? That I would like all you guys to be back in India as early as possible to sort of, get this next wave and be part of it early, rather than, wait for 3 years or 4 years and then get.
One of India's biggest strengths, I guess, probably the biggest strength in some ways, it's human capital, the sheer numbers of young people, and and for the tech industry to take advantage of that. Do you think that, and I say this very conscious of the fact that it's for men, relatively privileged backgrounds, sitting here talking, but is the tech industry doing enough to involve women, involve people from lower income backgrounds, tap into that pool of talent?
I mean, there's a ton of ways to talk about that. I mean, one is that we certainly at Twitter see is that the internet in general is still a platform for young men in general. If you look at the data, Twitter, the same is true for Twitter. So we spend a lot of time, today being International Women's Day, we spend a lot of time in India and around the world thinking a lot about how we can make Twitter, first and foremost, feel like a safe platform for users. And we've made a lot of strides in that regard recently. With respect to talent and acquisition, we're pretty proud of our recent acquisition, which was founded by a woman and run by a lady in India. But it's for us, our mindset has kind of been on the consumer side. How do we make this platform feel more accessible for young women? Because the internet in particular still is a place that we find is the value proposition still isn't resonating. I don't know if you guys have thought about this on the consumer side or primarily on the talent side.
I think the kind of demographic that uses you also depends a little on the business model. For example, I'm sure e-commerce, especially Myntra and all these, will have largely women consuming. We see consumers across both men and women. It's predominantly men, but I think the skew is less in our case than probably Twitter. Especially because women are in general not mobile in India, and a platform like Ola opens up mobility for them in a much more safer way. Using a platform like Ola is safer than the unorganized way people travel, even auto rickshaws and all. It's more safer. It's incumbent upon companies like us to make it even more safer. Work with the government, use technology to build safety features into the app, which we've done. The real talent opportunity for my business specifically is actually on the driver side. Right now, I work with 100,000 drivers. Can we scale that up to 1 million drivers? Right, and that's the business potential also, even beyond that. But if we can scale that to 1 million drivers, that's going to affect 1 million driver families. Each of those families has a female as a wife and children. And how can we do that fast enough? How can we do that in a sustainable way to really bring about society change? That's the real opportunity I see.
Yeah, I'll say a related point is how in India, in particular, if you're in the consumer space, you have to be really pointed about value proposition. One of the things I say at Twitter is we have to declare our major. Like, what is it exactly we want people using this service for? We can't be ethereal and esoteric about it. And if for women it's a particular, if we need to be working with Ekta Kapoor to scale an experience for content that scales with her audience, let's say during the day, let's be pointed about it, right? If it's another experience around safety, young women using Twitter to communicate in the context of safety or organize their voice, we need to be very specific about it in our product, from a product marketing standpoint, from a product standpoint, and of course from a consumer marketing standpoint. So expect more on that from us.
I just want to say that India is probably not that different than the US when it comes to this issue. So I don't want to highlight this as an India issue. I think it's an issue that's probably true across the tech ecosystem. Whether it's you go to Silicon Valley, 90% of the entrepreneurs that you see, 99% of the VCs that we meet are all male, and that's a broader issue that we have to address. I don't think it's an India specific issue. There is definitely more participation from women in the ecosystem today. We discussed, Bhavesh was talking about how we are building these micro entrepreneurs. So you're seeing these platforms that are getting created, at Snapdeal, at ShopClose, at Craftsvilla. We have 3 marketplaces where we are seeing a significant change in the type of suppliers that are coming online. So initially the suppliers were these large brands that were going on these platforms and selling, just like they were selling a store. We're seeing more and more these micro entrepreneurs that are coming online. So women are selling accessories, jewelry. Now these are things that, I don't know how many of you have come from small towns in India. My mom used to go to their, that person's house, and I can buy jewelry from there, I can buy saris from there, or I can buy, different apparel, whatever else. And these people are now finding a way between the platform that's given to them, between the logistics companies, being able to pick up product from anywhere in India today. There's just a fundamental shift that we're seeing that's allowing empowerment of women entrepreneurs in the ecosystem.
We can maybe take some questions from the crowd. So if you've got questions, hold up.
In San Francisco and in the Valley, you see, startups with students or people working from different backgrounds in the sense that you see artists, you see architects, you see, business people, finance people, everyone collaborating on ideas and, through that you get a whole different perspective. Looking at different things in the environment itself. So do you see much of that in India in terms of innovation, or is it only like engineers, just stick with engineers, business people, stick with engineers?
Yeah, so I actually think that it's partly the way academia is set up in India. The universities are separate, so at least going in, you will see if groups are getting together to start companies, they will come from a particular institute. So people coming from IIT would be, 5 IIT people getting together. But that is changing, particularly as right now we are looking at a company which is building a brand. It's a fast fashion company building a brand. And for them, the guy who's come up with the idea is IIT. He's looking at it from a data perspective. That doesn't come from the fashion industry, but he realizes that the only way he'll build a brand is if he has somebody from NID working with him. So he's gone and found somebody from NID is the National Institute of Design, and they found somebody from there as one of their co-founders. So that, depending on which area you are looking to start a company in, there is this cross collaboration happening. But it's very different than what you would see at a Stanford or a Harvard or maybe where you have cross-disciplinary programs in the university itself. Those cross-disciplinary universities don't exist in India.
I would say from a recruiting standpoint, we face that acutely at Twitter, challenge, because we see ourselves as a media company that happens to be in technology, right? We're a platform for content. And so when you're recruiting people on the business or product side, you're looking for people that have an appreciation for art and culture, pop culture actually, but can also think about scaling a consumer technology company. And it's been very hard to find people, forget about at an operational, can you code and collaborate at the same time, but even have it be insightful about both has been quite hard.
So my views are exactly Sandeep's views. Given that academia is very siloed in India, I think it will take some time before we see at the founding level a lot of multidisciplinary teams getting together. But right now, even though the founding teams are pretty much homogeneous of engineers from one particular background, once the company scales up and when you want to hire, there is reasonable talent available across the space. For example, designers. There is reasonably good enough talent available from a design background. But from a founding perspective, I think it will take time. I think the ecosystem also needs to do more to enable that.
I don't know how to choose, so just go from this.
Kind of jump a bit. And can you introduce yourselves as well when you ask questions?
My name is Harsh. My question is more towards, we all talk about consumer markets in India being fairly good. I run an enterprise company and in India that's pretty not the most sexy thing to do. You sit tight in 5 years with a 30-40 million company at the end of 5 years. The question is, what is lacking in the ecosystem today to support more enterprise companies? And Sandeep's invested in a couple of them. We're purely looking westwards as a sales channel. As an ecosystem, both from a customer's perspective or even company perspective or even investment perspective, how do you see that ecosystem changing for enterprise companies in India?
I can start just from our experience. So for Twitter to scale, we rely on enterprise companies winning with us, right? So we rely on a range of other companies that, for instance, in ZipDial's case, or another company that work with television channels and others to do interesting things with tweets. It turns out some of those relationships need to be commercial. And it turns out that a lot of media companies, let's say, and by media company I mean TV broadcaster, celebrity, news organization, sports federation, have no interest in paying, right? They don't budget for this. Even Star Sports, with Ishankar Star, bought up, as far as I can tell, most of India. Even there, we have a hard time articulating that this isn't a gimme, right? If you're really interested in telling stories, let's say during the Cricket World Cup, that are informed by the roar of the crowd on social media, that are involving the crowd in the storytelling, that are visualizing it in interesting ways, oh, Rishi, just do it for us. No. This is a discipline with a range of vendors who, by the way, are valued at extraordinary levels in the United States. And so the ecosystem needs an ecosystem in a sense. And so we've had trouble getting traditional businesses to see value in these niche enterprise world. And Zipval had to get scrappy about that.
But I believe that's changing also.
It's all changing.
My company is a lot of business to enterprise companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the ecosystem he's talking about, that, as you are getting in and you're looking at the business in a very different way, you will be okay paying because you have dealt with this issue in the past. So I'll give you an example of a company that does point of sales terminals for the retail market. And it's built a great product, and he went to meet with Kishore Biyani, the largest retailer in the country. And he presents his thing, and Kishore Biyani at the end of it says, how much will this cost? He says, maybe we'll start with your stores in Bombay, and it'll cost you $100,000, 50 lakhs. And Kishore Biyani looks at him and he starts laughing. He says, I can hire 6 engineers and get the same product up and running in the next 6 months. Why do I need to pay you? And I'll probably pay these engineers, 2 lakhs each. So 10 lakhs, I'll have this product up and running. That's where the gap is. The value associated with intellectual property, the understanding that this is not done, it just can't be done by 5 engineers and putting them in a room. There's got to be somebody who's thinking about the problem, who's putting it all together, creating a product plan, defining a product roadmap and building it out. And there's value to that, and you have to pay for that value. That is where I believe there is a big gap between what Sanjay Jindal talked about in the other room with this whole culture and so on, and where we are right now. So enterprise technology, enterprise companies will still take some time to scale in India. What Bhavesh is saying is exactly where I see opportunities. So we funded a company called Unicommerce. And Unicommerce went and built an enterprise product. It basically sits between sellers, so suppliers to e-marketplaces, and the marketplaces themselves. And we had no problem getting people to pay because a Snapdeal, Amazon, a Flipkart, they all understand that this is a problem that they have to solve. And suppliers don't mind paying because they have to get to these marketplaces. And so it's a shift that's happening. It will take some time, but you will see enterprise companies come out.
Hi. So you mentioned that salaries in Bangalore for tech talent are in US dollar equivalent in Bangalore. So they are kind of extremely surprising. How sustainable do you think it is, and how long this party is going to last?
See, some of it is structural because there is more and more demand for such talent. Some of it is structural. Some of it is also just in the exuberance of the moment. I think it'll stabilize probably early next year. That's my sense. But some of it is definitely structural.
So it's a year more to go. Good to know.
We have
We were discussing this before. I actually have some concerns around that because there is if you look at the overall starting point of what a customer is going to pay in India for the same service versus what they're going to pay here, there's a clear difference. So Ola Cabs cannot charge the same price point that they're charging for their product in India versus what we're going to charge here. So for them to pay the same salary that Uber is paying here, I just don't know how it came to sustain. It's a fundamental problem. So the only way you can see is either the Indian consumer has to pay more to cover these salaries, or you have to keep raising money from investors. And at some point, investors will say, "Got to get the consumer to pay more or cut your costs." That's the.
If you actually look at more deeply, right, it's not as if every engineer is getting Silicon Valley talent. It's only top talent which can command that, and companies like us will pay that. The average engineer coming out of IIT is still getting the same salary. Right? So
That's a big gap.
And that's $1 million.
Just say it.
keep it quiet.
Just in case there's any engineers in the room.
So I'm speaking from a financial standpoint. So there's this cloud of pessimism in America right now regarding the tech bubble that might be worse than the internet bubble because of all these skyrocketing valuations and like the non-use of level debt, and there might be a liquidity crunch. and with the texting in India heating up, we always want like things to be good, but can there be some kind of measures to be taken so that like India doesn't face a situation like this where you have mass students of the world like talking about possible.
Yeah, so what drives the bubble, right? What's driving the bubble right now is scarcity. So where there's scarcity of talent, there's the 10 guys that everybody wants to hire, and they can command whatever salary. There's scarcity of companies. So there's only one Bhavesh that's building Ola Cabs. So everybody wants to get into Ola Cabs. So at some point, what is driving this behavior is the fact that India is relatively underpenetrated, and it has scarcity of leaders who can build large businesses. And because of that, valuations are going through the roof. These are markets that are relatively winner-take-all markets. So in those markets, it makes sense to pay up upfront and get in, because if you don't get in the right now, it's very hard later on to still get in. So that's the behavior that you're seeing right now, is winner-take-all markets, clear scarcity issue, let's get in as quickly as possible. As that market expands, as you see more traditional companies emerge and so on, I don't see that same behavior in these markets.
So I don't think the Indian tech valuations are in a bubble right now, because the market potential is very, very deep. And people used to say this about China also, 4 or 5 years ago. Alibaba, what Alibaba raised that in like 4 years ago, and today it's like a order of magnitude different, and people used to think that's about. Right? So that's the exact same thing that's happening in India. The potential size of the market is so large. So I personally don't believe it's a very premium valuation.
So you said like with these businesses it's sort of about the winner takes all. When talking about a lot of Indian companies that are doing well right now, it's business models that are copied from the West in some way. So do you think as the global partner comes into India and as it's not entering, the Indian companies can hold their own, or
You should ask him as well.
Okay.
You started with this.
So I strongly disagree that it's a Western business model that Indian companies are building out, because Indian scenario is very different. Is Alibaba just a copy of Amazon? Not at all. It's a very different business model. Similarly, Ola is very different from Uber. Very, very different. People here feel it's the same because it's essentially the same taxi service, but it's very different. The opportunity we're going after is very different. And to just give you a few examples of how it's different is you can pay by cash. Now that's a very, very big thing in India. You cannot address 90% of the market if you don't accept cash. And cash means a very different backend, right? We also work with auto rickshaws. It's a very different mindset to work with auto rickshaws. People here would know what auto rickshaws are. They're like naturally conditioned. Also, the opportunity for Ola would be more broader than just just cabs. Like, can we use this on-demand logistics framework that we've built to go into other consumption categories, where in India there's nothing built out right now. Right. So similarly, Flipkart has done a very different job from what Amazon has done, and in India, Flipkart is doing. So just to summarize, 2 levels of question. One, the opportunity is very different, and second, some business models where you require on-ground presence and on-ground innovation, the local innovator who always wins. Some business models are different. For example, Twitter is different, Google is different, Facebook is different, where it's more of a product-led game. And there, India is more closely aligned with the US.
But I would even say, one of the things I tell our board and executive team is, to live in India right now, at least in my world, social media and peer-to-peer messaging, let's say, company media, is to experience being marketed by Twitter, Line, Facebook, Hype, WeChat, Viber, and this is true in India, this is true around the world. In the US, there's this sort of, everything's sort of settled, right? You use sort of Twitter, Facebook, etc., and iMessage, I guess. But I think the game is still, I think in Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia is where a lot of innovation is happening with respect to even in our space. We're learning from Hike, which is built by Sunil Mittal's son, right? Around how do you use or apps like Savan, right? Like they're also or Ghana, the music app. Not only on the product side, but how do you tell a story to consumers and acquire consumers? And these are lessons that we're learning from uniquely Indian companies. And these are lessons we're sharing back in California about what the future looks like.
So on that point, one interesting dynamic now is innovation is all parallel. 7 years ago it was Western models which came into India, e-commerce and all, but now it's all parallel. China is doing innovation in payments that America is not. India is doing more innovation in communications, that's it. So innovations are all happening in parallel, and the technology industry is broadly in the 3 centers of the world is very, very parallel innovation.
Well, I'm Bobby. I'm a product manager at Bloomberg. I had a question about India as a country itself. Somebody the other day compared India to Europe, where each state is a country by itself, and you have different kind of challenges in different states. So, with your experience, what kind of differences do you find across doing businesses across different states in India?
I think I wouldn't say it's a very. I don't really buy the Europe analogy. I don't know much about Europe, but I don't think it's that different. There is fundamentally the consumers have become more homogenized over the years. Maybe 50 years ago they were more different. But there are differences in language, there are differences in culture. So what that translates to is we do different kind of customer acquisition strategy in each market. But the core product is still the same because fundamentally the problems are still the same in each city. The governments have, let's say, not built the roads properly in each city, or there is no real taxi industry in any city, in any state. But what differs is how you acquire those customers from my perspective.
I lived in Europe for 3 years, and I actually think that there is a lot to be said, that there is a similarity between how Europe is built out and how India is built out. I mean, I was just sort of saying that in some way that you have to think about each new market as a new market.
Yeah.
Unlike in the US, where if you were to sort of roll something out, how you do it in San Antonio versus how you did it in San Francisco wouldn't be that different. I think in India there's a lot more nuance that you have to think about, local laws.
I think that's true.
How you set up in Bangalore versus how you set up in Bombay. Politicians, everything is just completely.
Especially for us, engaging with the government especially is very local because transportation is a state subject, it's a concurrent subject. So that's something which varies state to state.
And media, it's the language issue is also different.
Yeah, I mean, what I tell my friends in California is, imagine flying from London to Milan, and there's a whole different set of film stars people care about. Right? And the same thing is true here, where I fly to Hyderabad. We just had, I was just telling these guys that Surya, a big Tamil actor, apparently everyone loves, just joined Twitter 2 days ago. Very different experience from interacting with the folks in the Hindi film industry. At the same time, in a game of limited resources, you have to, at least for us, we don't have as many people as Ola Cabs has, believe it or not. You have to pick your spots in India. If you're really interested in scaling, you have to triage like crazy and pick a few spots that give you wholesale opportunities to scale consumer acquisition and learn from consumers. And for us, it's been I hate to use this ABCD stuff, but we just had to be really thoughtful about what the data tells us with respect to when and how consumers surge to the platform and when and how we ought to maximize learning. So for us, we've been forced to think kind of nationally about it, which is very challenging. And happy to talk more later about what that's actually looking like.
But I would like to go back to my point of, there are some similarities also across cities. So when I look at my fastest growing cities, I think tier 2, tier 3 cities are the fastest growing independent of whichever state they are. Right? Because infrastructure is fundamentally broken similarly in all those cities. Right? So in a way, the product scales across the country. The way you acquire customers for that product might be unique to each state, and government especially is unique to each state.
Yeah, from a content standpoint, it's why we've invested so heavily in cricket, because it obviously gives us a national experience. From a national politics standpoint, we've spent a lot of time there as well. From an entertainment and news standpoint, it's been very, very hard to scale across. So we've just picked a few spots, and have hoped others would emulate a big set of money.
So if you're a young entrepreneur, thinking about setting up in India, you wouldn't advise trying to build an Indian company, start in one location, or how do you do it?
Yeah, so again, Bhavesh is a good person to give you as an example. Started in Bombay and ran into huge headwinds, right? And then went to Bangalore and really built it out. So, but what we do tell entrepreneurs is get your model right. First, one location. before you go expand very aggressively, because the cost to rework things in India, you would imagine is low, but it's actually quite high because of the, it's more painful. To change things in India is much harder than it is in the US.
Okay, so one last question.
I have a question for Sabir. So we're talking about the tech talent, right? So the entrepreneurial talent, where's the bulk of it coming from? And the second part of that question is, if it's coming from the IITs and the NITs and institutions of national recognition, what can these institutions actually do to encourage more people to take the entrepreneurial path? This is like Java and Ola, for example. Where can you find the next Bhavesh?
So you're finding the next Bhavesh from where Bhavesh came, IIT Bombay. Whoever's from IIT Bombay, you guys should have stayed there for a while. But the biggest driver of entrepreneurship today is role models like Bhavesh. People are looking at these examples and saying, what did they do right? And they're reaching out to them. I come into a lot of people who have said, oh, I spoke to Bhavesh, he suggested this, or I've spoken to Rahul Yadav at Housing, or I've spoken to Kunal Behel, or whatever, right? So people are coming to you saying, I've had those conversations with existing entrepreneurs. So I don't know how many finds the time to talk to them, but they are making the effort, they are making the, so it's a commitment you're making to the ecosystem to promote the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The entrepreneur is coming from all walks of life. I don't think it's just the IITs, I don't think it's just the NIDs, they are actually from BESIT, from Indian Institute of Sciences, from today if I look at India, one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is the level of confidence that you see in these folks is just amazing. So the key thing is you just don't want it to veer to the other extreme of arrogance and foolhardiness, which I worry with the amount of capital that's coming in, some of that is likely to happen. I had an interesting incident where somebody has just sold their pharma business and they are sitting with 300 crores of cash. And he comes and asks me at a party, he says, Sandeep, you did Snapdeal, you must have done really well. Can you find me the next Snapdeal? I'm like, you come from a pharma background, find a pharma company that you can, mentor and help grow and so on and invest in that. Why are you going to try and find the next Snapdeal? So that's the concern, that you see all this dumb money ending up, and funding these guys which shouldn't get funded. That's one concern.
Thank you very much to Sandeep, Rishi, and Bhavesh. Really interesting. Thank you everyone for coming as well.